So here's the overview of what I used on the Bodywork episode. Got some medium grit sandpaper. 3M is good stuff, honestly. It lasts a lot longer than some of the cheaper stuff. It's worth buying it. I've got a pretty big pack of this because this is what you'll be mostly using. This is taking down the bigger stuff, sort of preliminary sanding. Any of the paint that's already on there that you need to take off, you're going to want to use this. Any body filler that you use, you're going to want to use this. And then I have some extra fine. This is 320 grit, same brand. I just bought a small thing of this because this is for the final sort of pass. This is for going over everything and making sure it's all smooth. Now along the lines of sandpaper, you're going to want probably one of these sanding sponges because it makes it a lot easier to get everything flat and even, especially when you're going over large panels. I usually have razor blades sort of hanging out because they're real useful for whether it be peeling things off, you know, trimming plastic, cutting bits, or even whenever you get some paint drips, you can literally cut them with a razor blade and then saves you a bunch of time with the sandpaper. Now I have couple of screwdrivers for removing trim. Body filler. This was important because I had holes in the trunk lid for a spoiler and that cracked fender. Then I have a shop rag, you know, just a regular shop rag, maybe some alcohol or some paint thinner if you need it. And lastly, primer. Now filler primer and self-etching primer, they don't necessarily do the same thing, but I use them interchangeably. The filler primer has a thicker viscosity, so it fills in little divots better. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I picked up most of this stuff. Maybe the body filler is probably like 12 bucks. Those primer cans are probably 4 bucks a piece. 10 bucks in sandpaper, 3 bucks in a sponge, you know. It's less than $30 all in all, and you can do a pretty good job of prepping a car for paint or wrapping like I did, and you know, on a budget. Oh, and if you're especially particular, you might want to pick up a roll of masking tape. I didn't use this, I just sort of dealt with the overspray, but you don't want to spray paint your windows with primer and things like that, so this might come in handy. And even some of that paper or newspaper even. So today I've got the E30 behind me and we're going to do some body work. I'm going to go over pretty much the basics of just paint or wrap prep. We're going to sand out some of the dings, we're going to prime it all, and we're going to get it ready. First step is we're going to remove all this trim, these impact strips off the sides. Now, sometimes you're going to want to reuse these, so you save them and you got to be careful pulling them off, but I'm not going to use them. I'm just going to wrap over it and leave the gaps there. So essentially these just clip on, and with a good pull, I think you'll see it'll come right off. Now I probably broke the clips, but like I said, I don't really care. Ow! Now I'm taking some denatured alcohol just with a plain old rag, getting all the junk out of the grooves from it developed over the years, you know. And as soon as I'm done with this, I can take some sandpaper and clean up all this, then prime over it, sand it again, and get it ready for wrapping. I recommend with any sanding job, especially on a car, that you get one of these sanding sponges, because when you're going over a flat piece, you don't want your fingers to create little divots in the paint that have low spots and high spots. With a flat piece of sanding sponge, you just go over it and it'll help keep everything nice and even. So I've got some paint drips here, which is actually, I didn't do this, but it's a perfect example of how to take care of paint drips. You can see them right here. It's from that eggshell color that they repainted it, but it's dripped down. So basically all I'll do is I'll take my flat side of my sanding sponge with the 150 medium grit on it, and I'll just take it off, sort of in line with the rest of my sanding in the door. I'll just gently go over it until they're no longer visible and I can't feel them anymore. So now I'm back with a fresh sheet of sandpaper, the medium grit, and I'm just going to go over this trunk. I'm going to try to get out all these, starting with the holes, the uneven bits, the parts that are going to make my wrap look like shit. So this is pretty much what it'll look like after you're done sanding. It'll be very smooth. You can run your hand across it and not feel any raised bumps or edges. Got some body filler here, and we're gonna body fill these holes in this fender. Should go pretty quick, and I'm just hoping to knock this out today. So now I'm mixing the filler and the hardener. Once it's sort of this pink color, it's ready to be applied. Now I'm just gonna put a little bit on this hole, sort of let it get in there. And I'm going to take, ideally you would use one of those plastic former things, but I'm just going to use this. And my hand a bit. Now you want to have a little more than you need on there so that when you sand it, you'll end up with a perfectly smooth surface. So I'll let that sit 20 or 30 minutes, and then I come back, I sand, and I prime it. So now the putty is set, and I'm sanding it essentially. I'm just taking it back down to a nice flat space so that when I'm done, ideally you won't even see anything. It'll be primed and you won't be able to tell the difference or that there was ever holes there in the first place. So that's good enough for me. You can see just how it's probably going to end up looking when you're ready to prime it. With a fresh sheet of sandpaper, I'm just going to go over this side now and do the same thing as the other side. So this side was a lot easier because I used a fresh sheet of higher sandpaper and less body filler than the other side, but that's looking good too. But now I'll go ahead and I'll lightly brush on just some primer on these exposed metal parts and things like that, just to make sure that they don't rust and get them ready for wrap. Now the professional opinion is that you hold the can 6 to 8 inches away from it, you lightly spray, and you add one coat at a time. I try to do that, as you will get the best results doing that. But with a primer you don't have to be as careful, because when you go back you can very easily sand this down, but when you're putting on a base coat or something like that, you have to be very careful. You have to do light coats and build them up slowly, or else you will develop runs, and then you have to restart essentially. So here's what it's looking like after priming it all, getting it all done. Some of the issues I were having completely disappeared. I'll go back and I'll sand after this, but for now that's good. Now after about 10 minutes, I think this primer is nice and set. And I'm gonna go over with some fine 3M P320 sandpaper. Just a little more primer. Go over any spots I brought back to bare metal. Go over the spots that I was having some trouble with. And then I'll just do it all again. And as I do it, it'll fill in any little imperfections. Do the same thing on the rear quarter panel. You really want to take your time with this process, because if you go with too hard of a sandpaper, or you go too aggressively, or you don't let it dry, you end up having to do the whole thing over again. It takes you twice as long. So it's worth taking the time to let it dry and doing it properly. I'll tell you that right now. That'll save you the most time. I've had projects where I go to sand it too early, the primer isn't dry and set, and then I end up scratching it up and I have to take off all the paint and start over again. So these E30s have a problem with rusting. They didn't start galvanizing the chassis until the later years. Essentially, I had some surface rust just hanging out in this lower inner fender part and a little bit on this part. So I just took it all off with some sandpaper, and then I'm going over it now with what is essentially just rubberized undercoating. It's mostly for like trucks, and it's specifically made for truck beds, you know, but the idea is that I can go over this and make sure that I don't have any rust in the future, you know, and it'll even provide some sound insulation.